Of course, you're like the original Elon Twitter parody account. I think I saw you tweeting at him from time to time when he made his rule about parody accounts have to be listed as a parody. Did you ever get a response? Like, how are you feeling about the new Twitter, Elon Twitter?
Well, it was very confusing when he bought Twitter because 2 years ago he had posted a tweet saying Bored Elon Musk is my secret troll account. So he's basically saying like don't impersonate people, and then he goes off and basically plays into the joke. I think most people understand that he was being sarcastic, but like hundreds of thousands of people apparently don't, and they still think that he runs this account, and that's fine. I'll let that go.
Now, all you need to do is tweet that Teslas will be free and take out a massive short.
This might be a plan that you have now revealed, but well done.
Well, it's definitely illegal, so don't do that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Between Two Layers. I am Carly Reilly, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only Robbie Ferguson, president and co-founder of Immutable X. And we are joined by a special guest today, Bored Elon in the house. What's up, man?
Hey, live from the internet. Good to be chatting with you guys.
Is that your catchphrase? Is live from the internet your go-to?
Yeah, I'm never gonna have like a cool backdrop like you, like an office or a hotel room. So I'm just in the black void of the internet. That's gonna be my home.
Yeah, my sick Miami backdrop. I'm here for Art Basel, which both of you somehow are missing. I feel like everyone in crypto is here except for the two folks on this pod today.
Maybe I'm there and I just told you I'm not.
That's true. The beauty of anonymity. Let's maybe start with the anonymity piece here. Bored, can you tell, for folks who don't know, the Bored Elon origin story? Folks don't know him. You've got, what do you have, 1 million, 2 million followers on Twitter. You are one of the most iconic Elon parody accounts. How did this all kick off?
There's two stories, really. One is back in 2013, I created this parody account on a lark the same day that real Elon Musk revealed the Hyperloop. So it was just kind of a crazy invention that he wrote a 40-page white paper for, and I decided, let me just take this character way too far. And yeah, it over the 9 years basically got to 1.7 million followers. I've kept my identity anonymous the entire time, and continue to crack jokes. And never did I imagine that the person I was parodying would eventually own the platform that I built this following on. The parallel origin story is outside of Bored Elon, worked in the video games industry for over 10 years for one of the most beloved Japanese game publishers ever. And especially in the last few years, really decided to take this big distribution that I've built with Bored Elon and focus a bit more on games, and in particular blockchain games, because I'm so fascinated by crypto and believe it's the next wave of where video games are going. So that brings us to today and sort of, the Bored Elon Musk story in 2022.
Most beloved Japanese video game makers. What does that mean, Robbie? Does that mean Nintendo? Does that mean Sony? What are the bets we're placing here?
Yeah,
Robbie, you got any bets?
I mean, I think there's a bunch. I think you've named a few of the popular ones, but yeah, I think Japan's been at the forefront. I think South Korea is probably going to be pretty aggressive in this market as well. So we'll see.
You had told me, Bored, when we had spoken, honestly, probably a year ago or something at this point, and I don't think you said it just now, which is that Bored Elon was basically an account you made because you were like, what does Elon, like, he just like creates like the Hyperloop or like creates a way to like have internet from space in his free time. Like, it was sort of this joke on like, what does Elon Musk do when he's bored? I think, now the answer is tweet and like,
yeah, he buys
trouble,
a company
but,
for $44 billion.
Yeah,
Exactly,
but back when you started the account, it was not necessarily that way. So one of the reasons I know we're excited to have you on Between Two Layers here is you're doing some really cool stuff with your company Boredboxes, which it's probably worth having you summarize for folks. And you've recently partnered with Immutable X in a couple of ways for Boredboxes. Why don't you run us through that?
Yeah, so I mean, anybody who's been in the gaming industry might have heard of things like Loot Crate or Humble Bundle, and the idea is just helping people discover games. So Boredbox is essentially the Web3 version of that. We drop boxes that have a selection of different blockchain games inside from different genres. Some games are already playable, some are coming soon. And it's really just tapping into my knowledge of the video game industry and trying to kind of spot the next, winners in the space. The last box that we dropped was in September, and we selected 5 games to feature inside, and 2 of them were IMX based games. So one of them was Cross the Ages, which is a CCG, TCG, or a trading card game similar to like Magic the Gathering. Very exciting developments there. And then the other was Eden Brawl. Anybody who's played like League of Legends will recognize the type of game that is, kind of a brawler. But it's got a twist because there's a ball involved. So both really great teams. And with Boredbox, we've just tried to be chain agnostic. We have games from on the Matic network, on IMX, on ETH. Eventually we'll do Solana. Kind of like the traditional video games industry. Like, people have a PlayStation, they have an Xbox, they play on PC. So we sort of look at chains almost like platforms, which is people will play games in different places, and we want to support all of them.
40%, that's not bad. 40% of the drop being Immutable X, huh?
Yeah, I guess if you're using the number 5, then yes, that is accurate.
Is that what you said? 2 out of 5?
2 out of 5. That is 40%. You are sharp with the math. And we will continue to look. I mean, IMX has definitely been, at the forefront, I think, when it comes to gaming, and the partnership with GameStop is a great example of that. And honestly, the team has been really good about sourcing games and just helping elevate games for our team. It's a lot of work to meet with teams, to have these conversations, to basically test out games and consider ones to feature in Boredbox. So I anticipate we'll have many more IMX games in future Boredbox endeavors.
Bored, are there any metrics you can give, or sort of like early? I know you're X number of months into Boredboxes, but just in terms of how that's going, the reception you're getting. We know there's contentiousness between the traditional gaming community and the NFT world. So what's it been like?
The game studios are very happy with us. I think the hardest part for them is finding quality players. So much of the Web3 space is focused around trading and sort of these degen activities and flipping JPEGs. And game studios want people who are actually going to play their games and not just sit on the assets and trade them. And so one of the proudest things that we've shared with studios is that we have a 95% retention rate, meaning that people who get our boxes, who get the game items inside, they hold them. They don't sell them. They don't, get rid of them. And that's basically what people want. So we're not necessarily going for quantity. We're going for quality. And if you look at the traditional gaming space, when it comes to like acquiring players, companies spend a lot of money, hundreds of dollars sometimes to acquire one player. So that's kind of our promise, and the big metric we're trying to share with studios is we're going to get you somebody who's actually going to play your game, and that's the hardest thing to achieve right now.
So I feel like we would be remiss if we had you on during this era, Bored, and we didn't bring up Elon and Twitter. We don't have to harp on it for too long, since I know it's a very played out. I mean, it's still playing out, but it's a conversation that a lot of people have been having. But of course, you're like the original Elon Twitter parody account. I think I saw you tweeting at him from time to time when he made his rule about parody accounts have to be listed as a parody. Did you ever get a response? Like, how are you feeling about the new Twitter, Elon Twitter?
Well, it was very confusing when he bought Twitter, because 2 years ago he had posted a tweet saying that boredelonmusk is my secret troll account. So he's basically saying, like, don't impersonate people, and then he goes off and basically plays into the joke. I think most people understand that he was being sarcastic, but like hundreds of thousands of people apparently don't, and they still think that he runs this account, and that's fine. I'll let that go. But yeah, it's been interesting. Like my metrics on Twitter have doubled in the month since Elon took over. So I guess I'm happy with the trajectory of where things are going.
Yeah, well, apparently overall activity is on the up and up. Not to get too deep into it.
Now, all you need to do is tweet that Teslas will be free and take out a massive short.
This might be a plan that you have now revealed, but well done.
Well, it's definitely illegal, so don't do that.
Not financial advice, right? Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
Bored, you have some interesting thoughts around what the future of Twitter might look like under Elon, and specifically for creators. I know this is something Elon's been tweeting about, frankly, and I think he responded to Stephen King of all people saying, like, the $8 fee that you're paying for Twitter Blue, part of that will go back to a creator program. And I know how important creators are, and he talked about bringing Vine back. So video seemed like it was something that's on his mind. What are you, maybe I'll go as far to say, as predicting when it comes to Elon, Twitter, and the creator economy?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about who was creating the bulk of the content on Twitter, especially in the last 5 years or so, it was journalists, right? It was the news people. It was like, you know, the traditional media that now seems to be leaving in droves for other places. And you know, the trouble with that is like if you presume that to be true, you have to ask, okay, so who's going to then be creating all the interesting tweets, right, for people to be reading? Because we know that most people on Twitter are lurkers and don't actually create content. So it's an opportunity now for Elon to bring in content creators, right? Like if you think about whether it's gaming or otherwise, people flock to Twitch, they flock to YouTube, and part of the reason they do that is because they can share in the revenue, right? Like they get a cut of the ad revenue that goes to those platforms. Right now, like let's say I want to stream video games, I don't have a lot of incentive to do it on Twitter because I don't get any money to do so. But if Elon comes in and basically enables that and either matches or beats the offer that Twitch or YouTube are making in terms of like, you know, paying content creators to make content, you're going to have this whole new cohort of individuals who are coming in and making Twitter interesting for others. So I think that's a big opportunity, and I definitely think it's a big opportunity for gaming. You know, YouTube and Twitch have kind of dominated for a very long time, but there's room for another platform. And I think that Twitter has also been sort of synonymous with real time. Like if you're talking about like live events, whether it's the World Cup or the Oscars, Super Bowl, people go on Twitter to comment on it. Twitch is sort of about live, but it's really game focused. But you know, if Twitter wants to continue the dominance of doing things in real time, if you think about like esports competitions and other things in the gaming world, I think there's just like a lot of low hanging fruit for him to shift a little bit of the focus of Twitter to gaming. It's a massive industry. It's underutilized by the gaming you know, audience and by game publishers. So I'm pretty bullish on it. I'm biased because I have my base on Twitter and I want it to be more gaming focused, but I do think it makes business sense, especially as, again, you know, sort of mainstream media is leaving and there's a void of content.
What do you think of that, Robbie? Do you think there are reasons folks would either leave Twitch or YouTube for Twitter for live streaming gaming, or do it additionally? Like, what does Twitter offer on that front?
You're getting outside of my domain expertise. I think it's really like execution specific, right? So I think YouTube took a whole bunch of market share off Twitch when they started focusing on taking over like live streaming and gaming content, etc. We've seen failed attempts by people like Microsoft and Mixer. I still remember the insane payouts they gave streamers who they had 6 months of exclusivity for and then shut down the platform. So to me, I think it's how well can they execute against this plan. Ultimately, the core assets of all these three businesses are pretty similar, which is the network value of people creating content on those platforms. I wonder if Twitter can retain the value of that core asset while shifting their identity to be sort of fostering more things like live video or interactive entertainment. One of the things that I think is unique about Twitter is it's much more sort of many to many than one to many, like these other platforms. It's interesting. I'm actually not a fan of Elon's purchase of the platform, not because I'm not a fan of Elon. I'm actually sort of a large fan in some ways. I just think that it's the upside of fixing Twitter as a platform is probably reduced to the upside of fixing, say, multiplanetary species or making the Earth green through solar panels. So I just think he has bigger priorities to work on, and it's also a very difficult battle politically, where no matter what changes he really makes, he's going to end up ticking off half of the Earth because it's an inherently politicized platform. And I think that loses his kind of what he's had for the last decade, which has been this beautiful halo effect ability to just work on important humanitarian problems and kind of fix them. So that's my personal 2 cents, which is really totally separate to my Web3 gaming stuff.
I remember you saying that. You and I had this conversation in person, Robbie, at VCon last year, back in May. I guess, was Elon talking about potentially buying Twitter as far back as May? I think he might have been, because I think that's what precipitated you and I talking about it. But whatever it was, whether because he was considering buying Twitter or he was just tweeting inane things, like you sort of made that point, like focus on the big species saving stuff that you've
Look,
been focused on.
I'm sure he'll probably improve the business numbers. Like, that's what is repeatedly done,
yeah.
probably more than any other entrepreneur in history. Everything comes at an opportunity cost, and the opportunity cost of his time and the projects he's working on is extremely high. And I wonder what value even a brilliant execution will bring to the world versus that time being spent elsewhere for him.
Bored, my question to you is going to be, or what was sort of my question to Robbie, which is why Twitter? But you preempted that with your point about real time news, which I think is really interesting. And I'm not somebody who uses YouTube or Twitch to watch live stream gaming, but certainly the real time news update piece of Twitter is something that Elon's really clicked in on and seems to be proud of, and has been tweeting about, like, you're getting better, more up-to-date information here on Twitter than you're getting from the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or whatever it might be. I think specifically around the FTX stuff, but really any breaking news story now, you're getting faster information on Twitter. Now, the veracity of that information may be a little bit mixed, but and I certainly go to Twitter for that. So it would be appealing if I could watch kind of live coverage of things. I totally could see myself using Twitter for that. And I'm not a huge Spaces fan, in part because I do like the visual element of being able to see people I'm talking to, and I get on a Spaces and I it's all funky to just talk to a group of people and not be able to see anybody as you're doing it. Any final thoughts there, Bored? Or I know we're going to move on to a fun conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the really far out sort of philosophy I would have if I were him is that he's completing the hive mind, right? So he has Neuralink, which is let's connect brains to devices. He has satellites in space, which connect every human on Earth from anywhere. Now you need the actual platform to then make that triumvirate take place. So Twitter of today will not look like Twitter of 2040, but this is the last piece of the puzzle if he can pull it off. Can he do it? I don't know, but it sort of makes sense in this sci-fi vision of the future that he has.
And whether or not that was a premeditated plan or just a nice
just winging
strategy
it.
He retrofitted.
Convenient, yes.
It's certainly up to debate.
Sounds brilliant in hindsight. Did you mention, Bored, I think something we had talked about is Twitter, your Twitter handle as a social login for gaming?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the last opportunity. Is there are a lot of games that let you log in with an email or even Facebook. I think using Twitter would be cool just because Twitter is kind of like a gamer tag. You don't necessarily use Twitter with your real identity the way you do on Facebook. I'd love to be able to take the the Bored Elon identity and log into video games, whether they're Web3 or just traditional video games. Is that a huge path for monetization? Not really sure, but I do think it's a good branding opportunity for Twitter. So I would definitely love to see more of that.
Okay, the big topic I want to get into with you here today is sort of the evolution of gaming. And I've been using this tagline, everything that's old is new again. I think, Bored, you and I have been talking a bit about how so many concepts or phenomenons within gaming X number of years ago or decades ago that then sort of fell by the wayside with new economic models for gaming or whatever the case may be are now really coming back in this blockchain gaming world. Why don't you kick us off with some of your theories around this, and then, it'll really just be a conversation. Want to get Robbie's thoughts on this. I might push back on some of your theories here, even as the gamer novice. So kick us off.
So I guess as somebody who's been observing the video games industry for a few decades now, I'm starting to see some trends starting to repeat that are in favor of players. I'll kind of break them down into different sections at a very high level, and I think we should stop and kind of discuss each of them. But it's this idea of game ownership, provenance in games, or proving your accomplishments, how games are distributed, and then also just the rise of indie and small developers. So first of all, game ownership. I think back to when I started playing video games, and probably when both of you did as well. We had more ownership. We had physical games. We had cartridges. We had CDs. At one point, most games kind of shifted to being digital items, right? You would download a game from a store. And I kind of think of the modern video game industry starting to happen in the mid 2000s. This is when Steam came around. This is when Xbox Live came around, and basically the pitch from game publishers was, hey, don't worry about buying this cartridge or this physical media anymore. You can just download your game, and if you lose your game, you can just download it again. It's super easy, right? And that was a great deal for the publishers as well, because they could basically create a digital file and sell it as many times as possible, like amazing profit margins. But the problem is that like when you used to play a video game and say like beat it, you could sell that game to somebody else. Like you had true ownership of this object. And so what you're seeing kind of come back now in a little bit of a different fashion is ownership in games, right? Like I might not be buying the entire game anymore. I might be buying objects inside of a game. Maybe it's a weapon, maybe it's a skin, a vehicle, a character, whatever it might be. But just as we used to own games in a much more sort of tangible way, we own stuff in Web3 games. And so I think that's good for players, right? Like you having the right basically just to do whatever you want with it and not necessarily worry if you are allowed to download it from a store that gives you the right to basically like license it or rent it. So that's kind of the first area. It's a controversial take, I know, for a lot of people, but I do feel like it's worth exploring.
I feel like it's not controversial in this room. I feel like this room of people that are like, yeah, that makes sense. Was there upheaval? I'm trying to think again in my academic, my studious studies of the gaming industry. I do remember coming across, I think it was a Blizzard game, or when that sort of first shift to like subscription came in. Was it StarCraft, which I know I referenced earlier, was like an early game where you had this sort of subscription style model? Like, was there any sense from the players that they were getting screwed in that dynamic as it was happening? Or is this something in hindsight we're thinking like, wow, we really lost something by not getting to own games?
I feel like, kind of taking myself back to that time, there were two areas of concern. One was the overall price. Like people just felt like, oh, why isn't the price of these games going down if I don't like they're not, like players aren't stupid. They know that it costs less money for game publishers if they're just selling digital files. The prices didn't go down. And in fact, also, they started charging subscriptions, right, to like use online services. So I think there was a little bit of upheaval there, but obviously we know how this story went and it was fine. And then I think that people did start to kind of like lose a little bit of the magic of, having the shelf behind them with their collection of games and like not having sort of that tangible representation of I've played this game and I've beat it. And I do honestly think that's why like game figurines and like posters and all the other merch that you see with video games has gotten bigger, because people can't show off like they can with books and other things, like all the games they've played.
What is at the root of the fear of the traditional gaming world around NFTs and ownership in game is the feeling that they've been screwed, or sort of it's been used as an extractive method against them as players in the past. Do I have that right? And I think Diablo has some history with that, where you had folks who like they tried to actually like create a marketplace to sell their objects or whatever, and folks felt like it was really extractive. Maybe I'm getting the game wrong, but is that the core here?
Well, I think it's just that players automatically now assume that a game publisher, whenever they release a new type of like model, whether it's loot boxes or subscriptions or in-app purchases, they basically have the same reaction, which is like, oh, you're trying to pull more money out of me, right?
Right.
And in many cases, they're 100% right. That is what's happening. And so here comes this new form of funding games, of, basically, a value exchange between players and game studios. And it's, of course, going to cause the same reaction, which is like, oh, this is a bunch of crypto people and they're trying to make games in this new way, and it's just going to end up screwing us over. So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is that it invites a lot of people who are degens and a lot of traders and people that we try to actively push away at BoredBox, who are basically going to ruin the video game because they are focused on trading and not necessarily playing for the fun of the game. And I think that's a very valid concern, and I think that game publishers and designers need to think about that and how to offset that. So, it's, there's some fair criticism. I think there's some misguided criticism that is just like a result of an abusive relationship between players and producers. And it'll take a little bit of time to kind of heal those wounds and win people over.
Of the takes I think you're going to share with us today, I feel like this is the one about which I have the least pushback, perhaps because I see this in other areas of NFTs. Like I've had folks on the program who are really into movies and say the same thing, right? Like we've lost the owning a DVD and you can see your DVD collection and the social signaling of that piece, and NFTs are going to be a way to bring that back in for movies. And even beyond, like, games have an even better argument for it because there's that utility piece to it as well within the game, even if it is just as a skin or something. But this idea of being able to own and then use that ownership to socially signal what your hobbies are, your loves are, no brainer.
Yeah, and I might add a perspective there as well, which is I think selling or trading the box copies of games, people did have the right to do those, but that actually wasn't the most interesting thing to trade, because at the end of the day, limiting access to being able to access the environment is actually not a way to expand access to the economy. And what we now have with free to play, as the actually ecosystem or the environment is completely free to experience, but then scarcity applies to objects or goods inside that economy, is actually a much more powerful mechanism for trade. So I think we've at the same time lost property rights as property rights became more important and much more valuable to have within these ecosystems. It's the same thing as the internet. We don't charge, or certainly Facebook doesn't charge people with a subscription cost to download Facebook and use it as an application. It's monetizing through your data or through your in-app transactions. Same thing through, even modern consoles today are actually heavily subsidized. They basically sell them at cost price because they want you to engage in the economies of purchasing assets inside games or the games themselves. So I completely agree, but I take it even to the next level, which is the most valuable thing is to be able to trade these in-game economies now that this is the biggest chunk of gaming as an economy.
Yeah, I will agree with that. It's basically a much more robust version of what we used to have. And it's more like individualized, right? It's not just like the trading of games and the access to the environment, as Robbie said, but it is the more valuable piece, which is like the stuff you've earned inside of the game. That's what has the most value. It's the rare gun that only 500 people have, or the rare skin that makes you special and shows that you're a top 100 rank player. That's the stuff that has value, that is making me really excited about where the video games world is going.
That segues us well into, I think, your second point here, Bored, your point about ranking and maybe like a public ledger for viewing rankings. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why don't you go to point 2 here in your everything that's old is new again?
Yeah, so, okay, arcade machines, right? So for anybody who doesn't remember these things, they were like giant boxes, and they only played one game, and you would put coins in them, and they let you, play as long as you could play with until you died. And sort of the analogy I'm pulling from is that the really good players at a particular arcade would put their name on the leaderboard. Then usually that'd be like 3 letters, right? Like kind of like an ENS actually. And that was like, okay, you could always see like the top 10, top 20 players of a particular arcade game. And it was almost like it was on chain, right? Like this particular arcade game at this location, you knew that BLD, whoever that is like the best Galaga player. And so what you have today is a lot of competitive multiplayer games. Cheating is a problem. People saying they accomplish certain things in video games is not always easy to verify. So like basically putting all games on chain to prove accomplishment, to prove that somebody actually did in a video game what they said, and to prove that you are actually like at the ranking you claim you are, it makes like perfect sense to me. So like this is something that I think is coming back, where like you basically have this technology of a ledger that lets everybody in the world know that, hey, I'm the top Illuvium player, I'm the top Call of Duty player. This is something that I would love to see, and this is like maybe me stretching this analogy of like what's old is new again, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it. Is people always kind of ask the question of like, do we really need blockchain for video games? Like and you could argue like a lot of times, no, you don't. You could do this with centralized servers if you wanted to, but if you want like indisputable proof in a world where like cheating, like rampant cheating happens in so many games, I think blockchain makes perfect sense more than any other technology.
What do you think of this, Robbie, before I give my 2 cents? I feel like, again, as somebody who isn't a big gamer, I have a harder time wrapping my head around how valuable I think this is.
I think it's hard for us to conceptualize how valuable it is because it's such a seismic shift in the way we conceptualize digital property. So when you think about even Bitcoin, saying well, you can create a central currency using a Federal Reserve and a centralized banking system, and then having this pretty radical shift to something that is completely decentralized, ownable, with predictable and trusted supply schedules is a very fundamental shift in the way we conceptualize our money. And the value to consumers is actually not immediately visible. In fact, it's probably going to be really difficult to use for the first few years and will have limited utility, but it has a radically different value proposition under the hood. I think there are similarly, but actually probably a much faster realization of value for ownership of in-game assets. I've been in Ethereum since 2015, and the reason we picked gaming as the first proper platform that we wanted to solve for in terms of digital ownership was it was so clear this would be the first major use case, because there is no speculation required around, will people want this in 10 years? At the time we made it, around $50 billion of in-game items were spent every year. It's now nearly 200 billion US dollars, not gaming revenues, literally in-game items. This is one of the largest economies on earth, and people get zero value for it. And the fact that they think that there's no value for this is simply because they've been brainwashed by the gaming industry and the incumbents based on a model that it captures 100% of the value for them. And shifting this will result in a much more powerful set of incentives for better games to be created with more longevity, with distribution between many creators rather than a few major publishers. But B will just open up a brand new standard for digital property ownership that will then go to finance. It will go to the way you own homes. It'll go to the way you own intellectual property. It will open up secondary financial markets of all of these. Suddenly you can pop your John Wick skin in Fortnite into an index fund or take a loan out against it. And you won't probably be doing these in a complex way. All of these will just be presented to you in very easy to use mechanisms. And a lot of these will be done by third-party financial ecosystems in order to develop mature financial ecosystems around this. But the other thing that's very clear is that this trend is absolutely inevitable, because there's been several shifts, I think, in gaming over the last 30 years. And in general, we've trended toward more accessible games with more open modes of economies, with cheaper ways to acquire players and monetizing through live services. So I think the first thing to know is that gaming really only started out caring about two things: acquisition and monetization. Can we sell people a copy of my game? And how expensive can I sell my copy of my game? $50, $100 for, a copy of The Sims or whatever have you. Now it's a different game, right? There's three inputs. People care about acquisition, monetization, and retention. How cheaply can I acquire customers for my free-to-play game? How much can I get them to stick around, either for my game or for games in the future? And how much can I get them to spend over time? But the paradigm has remained the same, which is that it is value extractive. It is, how can I get this player to spend as many dollars on me and they get nothing in return, because there's no reason to. That's not the standard that is expected. We're shifting to a model where the way to win at cheapest acquisition, highest retention, and best monetization is by aligning incentives with the player. And that is the fundamental thing that no other business model, a centralized database or some recreation of an in-game marketplace through Steam, can recreate, because the incentives do not change. And so I think if you look at all the transitions, we've gone from sell a game for a box set for $80 to play my game for free and monetize through in-game transactions, to now, in China, there are multiple complete carbon copies of popular games, say Clash Royale, Clash of Clans, which advertise themselves purely because their in-game items are cheaper than alternatives. The extrapolation of this trend is very clear. Just give players value in order to play in your ecosystem. And your monetization can be through taking clips on this economy as it grows. And this is a far more valuable mechanism of monetization. It will radically reduce the cost of acquisition for players, improve retention because they're now owners rather than renters and extracted. And it means they're going to spend far more in the real time, because you're building economies that are real stuff with real value. And the other thing it does is it opens up third-party access for developing games as platforms. And the most successful new games we've seen over the last 2 years have been games as platforms. So Roblox, which came out in 2006, is now a $20 billion company. And this is in the current tech market. And that's because it leveraged user-generated content and third-party businesses to expand the scope of what it could build as exciting environments. Web3 is going to take this to 100x, right? Because Roblox pays those developers 30 cents on the dollar. Web3 can make it so they're earning 100% of the creator incentives or the value that they are creating. And so I think at the fundamental kind of lens is gaming has been shifting towards this trajectory inexorably. But this is the infrastructure that is required to make sure that it doesn't just end up in a sort of end state equilibrium of who has the cheapest in-game transactions, who has the best crappy mobile advertising, who has the best ways to extract marginal dollars from players on this captive ecosystem, but that we can do this trend while aligning incentives and giving fair ownership properties. So I never had as much conviction in 2017 in what application would take off because there was a clear demand analog. Players spent 200 bill and they wanted to get something from that. And now I think we're seeing the maturity of that value proposition through $14 billion invested over the last 2 years. Those games have to be released and they have to be fun. But once we hit that, I think we'll see quite rapid change over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I would add, this is a really important point that Robbie touched on, was to acquire users, right? It costs a lot of money. It's a lot of money that's basically going to advertisers. Something like a Call of Duty spends $500 million to acquire users through advertising, paid media. If all of that money, instead of advertising, goes back to the players, that's a much better retention model that makes players a lot happier and really values their time and input into a game versus giving it to the App Store, or Facebook ads or whoever it might be. So agree 100% with everything Robbie is saying. And my quick rebuttal when anybody asks, like, where is the money coming from that fuels the value that players are getting is like all the ad dollars, right? Going from media companies now back to the players who deserve it.
There was obviously a lot in there that I think is important. One thing that I think is interesting, I spoke to somebody who does investments for consumer good products essentially, and now has a fund that's explicitly focused to consumer good products in Web3. And I was like, I'm sympathetic when people say, like, how is this actually different when you add blockchain? Like, what is actually different about this? And her point, I think, was so powerful, which was, especially right now on the surface, oftentimes if you're from the consumer's perspective, the what isn't that different. But the how is different, as we all know really well in this conversation, and that actually does really matter. The decentralization of the piece of this, which may not be coming into play as much in these really early days, but over time is, as network effects add and you have more people doing this, is super, super powerful, like really, really matters. And that'll become more apparent as more people join into these kinds of systems where they have ownership and interoperability. There are enough like platforms for which interoperability then makes it more fun and makes it more interesting, and the ownership piece of this can really be felt. And I think right now you have so many gaming consumers who are just looking at the what and being like, well, I've seen something that on the surface looks very much like this, and they're really not grasping how the back end how makes it fundamentally different. 3 and 4, do you want to talk about distribution board? I mean, it's hard to top the what we just went through, but if there's a couple final points here that you really want to hit home.
Yeah, I think ending it on distribution makes a lot of sense. So the 90s and 2000s, what you had was a lot more game consoles, and for people who played games on PCs, just like thousands and thousands of different individual websites where you could download games. A lot of people might remember things like freeware and shareware. There weren't these centralized platforms that we have today, like Steam and the Epic Game Store and the App Store. Like, if you think about where to get games today in terms of digital downloads, there's probably 10 like places, right, stores that come to mind. But what we used to have was something that felt a lot more decentralized, where you had to search more. It was a little bit harder, right, to find the gems, but there were just all these little shops that existed where you could get games and discover games. And I think we're kind of returning to that a little bit. Like, you still will have obviously really large distribution platforms, if you want to call them that, and we're starting to see that to some degree with GameStop and Fractal and other people who are trying to focus on games. But I also think that you're seeing the rise of gaming companies building their own marketplaces, or smaller boutiques like Bored.Box, just to plug myself a little bit, where people can come and shop for a selection of games. Even if you think about like the physical like GameStop stores versus what you have today at like a Walmart or a Costco or a Target, a little bit more of a curated experience, like smaller places to get lots of games. And so from a distribution perspective, I think that we're going back to a world where you can basically access games from many more places, and that will require curation and tastemakers and recommendations. But we're not going to necessarily be under the control of sort of these monopolistic, app stores and places where like you have to bend to the rules of one or two companies that dictate what is or is not allowed. And I think that, the most sort of relevant point is Steam's kind of hard stance on games that feature NFTs, right? Mm-hmm. They decided, hey, we don't want this. Epic Game Store said it's okay, but like we shouldn't have these powers that can even make those kind of sweeping decisions that can impact the gaming industry so much. So I personally think we are going back to a more distributed format of games where people can access them in different places, and I think that that's a net positive for players.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's why we focused on our global order book so much, because the most important thing is how do we unify liquidity between each of these trading experiences. There'll be thousands or tens of thousands of trading experiences. I believe quite strongly there'll be a few very successful aggregators, like the marketplaces that are building. But a lot of the sell side liquidity, especially low volume sales from mainstream players who don't want to go to a third party NFT marketplace website and sign up, will be using either an embedded version of those marketplaces inside the games or contextual trading. The example I always give is, imagine you just earned a John Wick skin in Fortnite and you want to sell it, and you're just an ordinary player, you don't understand crypto or NFTs, and that's the state we want to get to. You just want to be able to sell that asset inside the game. And right now, the buyer has to be inside that game in order for those orders to match and the liquidity to sort of be found. But what our global order book does is it propagates it to every marketplace or trading experience. So you could buy that on GameStop or on Aqua or on Rarible or any marketplace which is supported on IMX. And it means you can have really cool things like a Twitch streamer just wins a tournament with a skin and auctions it off in real time to a group of fans. You can have someone buying a deck they were just beaten with in Gods Unchained, or exchanging things in a real life metaverse in Imbu, which is a Second Life style metaverse. And so what this means is that buyers and sellers can trade no matter where they're sort of actually in the user experience, and those user experiences can focus on bringing the best mainstream experience to end gamers. So yeah, I completely agree with Bored there.
And again, in line with this, we're evolving from how do we have a system that maximally benefits the game creator, Epic Game Studios, Steam, Battle.net, whatever. All of this developed because these games were like, hey, we want to have a platform layer in which we can push other games and then take fees for that at sort of the expense of the end consumer. And now moving to a model where the end consumer actually is benefiting the most because there's more liquidity for the items they're trying to sell. It ups the odds that money's going to go back in their pocket and away from the hands of basically, the companies themselves.
And I think the cool thing is that these new aggregators are actually sharing value, right? Because aggregation at an eyeball level always has inherent value. They're like unbundling really only makes sense where that is a better experience for customers. It's a better product. And we saw this with Craigslist, right? Every line in Craigslist, like rentals became Airbnb, labor became Upwork, like every category in Craigslist debundled. But I think we'll still see very successful aggregators because there's a lot of utility to eyeball and experience aggregation for marketplaces. The difference is a lot of these marketplaces are sharing that value with their customers, and that's how they're growing. They're creating tokens which share fees from the marketplaces, or they're allowing people to own pieces of these protocols and then build their own user experiences on top of it. That's certainly what we're aiming to do with Immutable as an infrastructure powering marketplaces in games. And I think that's the beautiful thing, is you can have aggregation, but you can have the value of that aggregator be owned by the people who are using it the most or believe in that platform or helping it grow.
And on that note, I think that puts us just about at time. In my final 15 seconds here, I want to say thank you everyone so much for listening. If you are watching this on YouTube, of course, subscribe to the Immutable channel. More great content coming out all the time. If you're listening to this on a podcast app, subscribe there. And Bored, thank you so much for joining Robbie and me.
Yeah, Carly, Robbie, thanks so much for your time. It was a great chat as always.
Thanks, Bored.